Harold Hal Morrison pushed his weathered hands through his thinning gray hair as he stared at the rejection letter on his kitchen table. 73 years old, and another job opportunity had slipped through his fingers. The letter was polite but firm. They had decided to go with someone who better fit their needs. He knew what that meant. At his age, with his slow gait and the slight tremor in his left hand from an old injury, he was no longer considered suitable for most work. The small apartment around him told the story of a life that had seen better days. Faded photographs lined the mantelpiece, showing a younger Hal in military uniform, standing proudly with his unit in various locations around the world. The largest photo showed him receiving a medal from a general whose face had long since faded from public memory. But the medal itself, the Medal of Honor, sat in a simple frame nearby. Not displayed prominently, but present nonetheless. Like an old friend who visited quietly, Hal had never been one to boast about his service. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, he had learned that actions spoke louder than words. When he was drafted in 1968, he went without complaint. When his unit was pinned down by enemy fire in a rice paddy outside Da Nang, he had crawled through mud and bullets to pull 3 wounded soldiers to safety. When a grenade landed near their position, he had thrown himself on it, expecting to die. By some miracle, it had been a dud. But his willingness to sacrifice himself had saved the lives of 7 men. The medal had come with ceremony and recognition. But Hal had returned home to find a country that was not particularly interested in celebrating Vietnam veterans. He had quietly taken a job at the local factory, married his high school sweetheart Sarah, and raised 2 children. For 40 years, he had worked the assembly line, never mentioning his military service unless directly asked. The medal stayed in his drawer, brought out only when his grandchildren visited and wanted to hear stories. But time had a way of changing everything. The factory closed when production moved overseas. Sarah passed away from cancer 3 years later. His children, now adults with their own struggles, lived in different states and called when they could. His savings, modest to begin with, had been depleted by Sarah's medical bills and the rising cost of living. Social Security helped, but it was not enough to maintain the house he and Sarah had shared for 40 years. The decision to sell the house had been heartbreaking but necessary. He moved into a small apartment across town, bringing only what he could fit. The photographs came with him, as did the medal, though he sometimes wondered why he bothered. It felt like carrying around evidence of a man he used to be, in a time that felt increasingly distant. Now, sitting in his cramped kitchen with the latest rejection letter, Hal faced a harsh reality. His savings were nearly gone, and his monthly income barely covered rent and basic necessities. He needed work, any work, but his options were limited. Most employers took one look at his age and found polite ways to say no. The few who were willing to hire him offered positions that required physical strength he no longer possessed or technological skills he had never learned. That afternoon, while walking through downtown to save money on bus fare, Hal noticed a small sign in the window of a catering company. Help wanted, part-time server, flexible hours, no experience necessary. The building was old but well-maintained, with Peterson's Catering painted in simple letters on the glass door. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" "I saw your sign," Hal said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "About the job." The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret Peterson, looked him over without judgment. "We cater a lot of business meetings and events. The work is mainly serving coffee, setting up buffets, and cleaning up afterward. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. The pay is minimum wage, but tips can add up." "I can do that," Hal said. "I'm reliable, and I don't mind hard work." Margaret studied his face, seeming to look beyond his age to something deeper. "You've got an honest look about you. When can you start?" "Tomorrow, if you need me." She smiled. "I like that attitude. Come in at 6 in the morning tomorrow, and I'll show you the ropes. We've got a big contract with the Defense Department. Lots of meetings at the Pentagon and other military facilities. You'll need to pass a background check for security clearance, but I'm guessing that won't be a problem." As Hal walked home, he felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. It was not the career he had imagined at this stage of his life, but it was work, and it was dignified. He could serve coffee and set up meetings. His years in the military had taught him attention to detail and respect for protocol. Perhaps those skills would serve him well in this new role. That evening, he pressed his one good shirt and polished his shoes. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, seeing an old man with tired eyes but straight shoulders. Tomorrow, he would begin again, doing whatever was necessary to maintain his independence and dignity. The next morning, Margaret introduced him to the basics of the catering business. The work was straightforward but required precision. Coffee had to be fresh and at the right temperature. Food presentation mattered. Equipment had to be spotless. Hal absorbed every instruction, taking mental notes and asking questions when necessary. His first assignment was a staff meeting at a local government building. He arrived early, set up the coffee station and pastry display exactly as Margaret had taught him, and stood ready to serve. As officials filed in and took their seats, Hal moved quietly among them, refilling cups and replacing empty platters. No one paid him much attention, which suited him fine. He was there to do a job, not to be noticed. Over the following weeks, Hal settled into a routine. Most of his assignments were government meetings, military briefings, and corporate events. He learned the preferences of regular clients, who liked their coffee black, who preferred decaf, who had dietary restrictions. He took pride in remembering these details and anticipating needs. The work was not physically demanding, but it required stamina. He was often on his feet for hours, and the equipment cases were heavy. Some days, his old injuries reminded him of their presence, but the steady income allowed him to pay his rent and buy groceries without anxiety. More importantly, it gave him a sense of purpose he had been missing. Most clients treated him politely but distantly, the way people often treat service workers, with basic courtesy but no real recognition of his humanity. Some ignored him entirely, conducting sensitive conversations as if he were invisible. Others made small talk while he worked, usually about the weather or local sports. Occasionally, someone would thank him for his service when they noticed his military bearing, but most seemed unaware of his background. As weeks turned into months, Hal began to take satisfaction in his work. He might be invisible to most people, but he was providing a service that mattered. Important decisions were being made in these meetings, and he played a small but essential role in ensuring they proceeded smoothly. It was not glory, but it was dignity, and that was enough. 6 months into his job with Peterson's Catering, Hal had developed a reputation for reliability and discretion. Margaret often assigned him to the most sensitive meetings because she knew he could be trusted to maintain confidentiality and handle himself professionally in any situation. His calm demeanor and respectful manner made him nearly invisible, which was exactly what many clients preferred. The Pentagon contract had become a regular part of his schedule. 2 or 3 times a week, he would arrive at the massive building with his cart of supplies, navigate the security checkpoints with his temporary badge, and set up for various military briefings. The routine was always the same. Arrive early, set up the refreshment station in the designated conference room, maintain the coffee service throughout the meeting, and clean up afterward. These Pentagon assignments were different from his other work. The security was tight, the atmosphere was formal, and the conversations he overheard were often about matters of national importance: Joint Chiefs meetings, congressional briefings, strategic planning sessions. Hal moved through them all like a ghost, refilling cups and replacing pastries while generals and admirals discussed deployments, budgets, and policy. It struck him as ironic sometimes, serving coffee to men and women who held the same ranks as those who had once pinned the Medal of Honor to his chest. But he felt no bitterness about it. Military service had taught him that everyone had a role to play, and rank was about responsibility, not personal worth. Still, there were moments when he caught fragments of conversation about troop morale or veteran affairs, and he had to bite his tongue to keep from offering his own perspective. One particular Tuesday morning, Hal was assigned to what Margaret described as a high-priority briefing in Conference Room 3C. She had been unusually thorough in her instructions, emphasizing the importance of perfection in every detail. The guest list included several 3- and 4-star generals, a handful of Pentagon officials, and some civilian contractors. Hal arrived at his usual time, an hour before the scheduled start. He arranged the coffee station with military precision, ensuring the urns were full and properly labeled. The cream and sugar were fresh, and the pastries were arranged attractively on the serving platters. He checked and rechecked everything, then positioned himself at the back of the room, hands clasped behind his back, ready to respond to any request. The participants began filing in around 0800 hours. Hal recognized some faces from previous briefings. General Martinez from the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Thompson from Naval Operations, and several others whose names he had overheard but never learned formally. They moved with the confident bearing of career military officers, their conversation a mixture of professional updates and casual banter. As the meeting progressed, Hal moved quietly around the perimeter of the room, monitoring the coffee levels and watching for empty cups. The discussion centered on veteran healthcare initiatives and budget allocations for improved medical facilities. He listened with more interest than usual, having experienced the VA system firsthand during Sarah's illness when they had needed help with her medications. General Martinez was speaking about the need to better support older veterans, particularly those from Vietnam and Korea. When General Patricia Walker entered the room, Hal had seen her before but had never worked one of her meetings directly. She was a striking woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun and the bearing of someone who had earned every star on her shoulder through decades of dedicated service. As she took her seat, General Walker glanced around the room, acknowledging colleagues with professional nods. Her eyes briefly met Hal's, and she offered the same polite smile she might give any service worker. Hal nodded respectfully and returned to his position near the coffee station. The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours. Hal refilled cups, replaced empty platters, and maintained the supply of napkins and stirring sticks. The generals and admirals discussed funding priorities, staffing challenges at VA hospitals, and new initiatives to reduce veteran homelessness. Their conversation was businesslike, but not without compassion. These were people who genuinely cared about the welfare of those who had served. During a brief recess, several participants approached the refreshment table. General Walker was among them, reaching for a cup of coffee while continuing a conversation with Admiral Thompson about recruiting challenges. As she added cream to her coffee, she paused mid-sentence, her attention caught by something she had noticed. Hal was standing nearby, ready to assist if needed, when he realized General Walker was looking directly at him. Not through him, as most people did, but at him. Her gaze had focused on his chest, where his jacket had fallen open slightly, revealing the ribbon bar he still wore on a small pin inside his lapel. It was a habit from his younger days, a tiny display of his service that most people never noticed. "Excuse me," General Walker said quietly, interrupting her conversation with the Admiral. She stepped closer to Hal, her expression curious rather than suspicious. "Is that what I think it is?" Hal looked down at his chest, suddenly aware that his jacket had shifted. The small ribbon bar was visible, and among the colorful ribbons was the distinctive blue with white stars that represented the Medal of Honor. He had worn it without thinking, the same way he wore his watch or his wedding ring, a part of himself he carried out of habit rather than display. "Yes, ma'am," he said simply, his voice calm but respectful. General Walker's expression changed immediately. The polite professional smile was replaced by something deeper. Recognition, respect, and perhaps a touch of surprise. She was a student of military history and knew exactly how rare it was to encounter a Medal of Honor recipient, particularly one from Vietnam. "May I ask your name?" she inquired, her voice carrying the formal courtesy that senior officers used when addressing a peer of exceptional standing. "Harold Morrison, ma'am." "Most people call me Hal." The name meant something to her. General Walker had made it her business to know about Medal of Honor recipients, and she remembered the citation for Specialist Harold Morrison, 1st Infantry Division, Vietnam, 1969. The action near Da Nang. The 3 wounded soldiers saved under fire. The grenade that could have killed 7 men, if not for his willingness to sacrifice himself. "Harold Morrison," she repeated, as if testing the name against her memory. 1st Infantry Division? Da Nang. Yes, ma'am. By now, Admiral Thompson and several other officers had noticed the exchange. The casual conversation of the recess had quieted, as they sensed something significant was happening. General Walker stood straighter, if that was possible. And when she spoke again, her voice carried clearly across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, addressing the group, "I would like you to meet Harold Morrison, Medal of Honor recipient." The effect was immediate and profound. Conversations stopped. Coffee cups were set down. Every military officer in the room turned to look at the man they had barely noticed for the past 2 hours. The transformation in their expressions was striking, from casual indifference to sharp attention, from polite courtesy to genuine respect. Admiral Thompson was the first to step forward, extending his hand to Hal. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." The word "sir" hung in the air with weight that only military people could fully understand. In that moment, rank and age became irrelevant. What mattered was service, sacrifice, and the recognition of extraordinary courage under fire. General Martinez joined them, followed by the others. Each introduction was formal, respectful, and sincere. They asked questions about his unit, his service, and the action that had earned him the medal. Hal answered modestly, as he always did, focusing on his fellow soldiers rather than his own actions. "The men I served with were the real heroes," he said, a phrase he had repeated countless times over the decades. "I just did what anyone would have done, but everyone in that room knew better. They understood the difference between ordinary duty and extraordinary valor. They knew that the Medal of Honor was not given lightly, and that the man standing before them had proven himself in the most extreme circumstances imaginable." As the formal part of the meeting resumed, the atmosphere in the room had changed completely. Hal was no longer invisible. Officers who had ignored him for months now acknowledged him with respect. When he moved to refill someone's coffee, they thanked him personally, and some stood as he approached their seats. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone present. Here was a man who had risked everything for his country, now serving coffee to people who, while dedicated public servants themselves, had never been tested in quite the same way. It was a reminder of the debt that could never be fully repaid and the service that should never be forgotten. The day following the recognition in Conference Room 3C changed everything for Harold Morrison. What had begun as a routine catering assignment had transformed into something he never could have anticipated. Word of the Medal of Honor recipient working as a coffee server had spread quickly through Pentagon corridors, carried by the officers who had witnessed General Walker's discovery. By the next morning, Margaret Peterson's phone was ringing constantly. News organizations wanted interviews. Veterans groups were asking for speaking engagements. Pentagon officials were calling to discuss Hal's situation. Margaret, overwhelmed by the sudden attention, called Hal to warn him about what was happening. "I'm sorry, Hal," she said when he arrived for his scheduled shift. "I never expected anything like this. There are reporters outside, and my phone hasn't stopped ringing. What do you want me to tell them?" Hal sat heavily in the chair across from her desk, looking older than his 73 years. "I don't want any of this attention, Margaret. I just want to do my job." But the attention was unavoidable. A local news reporter had gotten wind of the story and published an article titled, "Medal of Honor Hero Found Serving Coffee to Pentagon Generals." The piece included details about Hal's service record, his current financial situation, and what many saw as the tragic irony of a war hero working as a server in his 70s. The article went viral within hours. Social media exploded with outrage, sympathy, and calls for action. Veterans organizations across the country shared the story, using it to highlight the broader issues facing aging veterans. Politicians issued statements about the need to better support those who had served. Donations began pouring in from strangers who were moved by Hal's story. General Walker, meanwhile, was dealing with her own flood of inquiries. As word spread about her discovery of Hal in the Pentagon, she found herself fielding questions from superior officers, congressional representatives, and veteran advocacy groups. Rather than shy away from the attention, She embraced the opportunity to advocate for veterans like Hal. 3 days after the initial recognition, General Walker called Hal personally. "Mr. Morrison, I hope you don't mind the call. I wanted to apologize for the chaos this has caused and to offer my assistance in any way possible." "No apology necessary, General," Hal replied. "You treated me with respect, which is all any soldier can ask for. I'd like to meet with you privately, if you're willing. There are some things I'd like to discuss." They met at a small diner near Hal's apartment, away from the media attention that was still swirling around the story. General Walker arrived in civilian clothes, but her bearing made her identity unmistakable to anyone who knew her. She had brought along a folder of documents and a determined expression. "Mr. Morrison," she began after they had ordered coffee, "I've been making some inquiries about your situation. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I believe there are resources available to you that you may not be aware of." She opened the folder and spread several papers on the table. "First, there's the matter of your veterans' benefits. Based on your service record and your wife's medical expenses, you should be eligible for additional support. The VA paperwork can be overwhelming, but I know people who can help navigate the system." Hal studied the documents. "I tried dealing with the VA when Sarah was sick. The bureaucracy was challenging. It shouldn't be that way for anyone, least of all a Medal of Honor recipient. That's something I intend to address at the policy level. But in the immediate term, we can get you connected with advocates who know how to work within the system." General Walker pulled out another set of papers. "Second, there are several veterans organizations that provide housing assistance and financial support specifically for older veterans. Some of these programs are designed exactly for people in your situation." As they talked, Hal began to understand the scope of what General Walker was proposing. It was not just about immediate assistance, though that was certainly needed. It was about recognition, dignity, and ensuring that other veterans did not face the same struggles he had endured. "There's something else," General Walker said, her tone becoming more formal. "The Secretary of Defense would like to meet with you. The story of your situation has reached the highest levels of the Pentagon, and there's a desire to address not just your individual case, but the broader issues it represents." Hal was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. "General, I appreciate what you're trying to do. But I don't want to be anyone's poster child. I just want to live quietly and maintain my independence. I understand that completely. But sometimes our personal stories become bigger than ourselves, whether we want them to or not. The question is how we choose to use that attention." Over the following weeks, Hal found himself caught between his desire for privacy and the growing movement that had formed around his story. The donations that had been pouring in were substantial enough to change his financial situation dramatically. Veterans groups were offering him housing, healthcare, and employment opportunities. Publishers wanted him to write a book. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell his story. Through it all, General Walker remained his advocate and advisor. She helped him sort through the opportunities, distinguishing between those that would genuinely help him and those that were merely exploitative. More importantly, she helped him see how his visibility could benefit other veterans facing similar challenges. The meeting with the Secretary of Defense took place 3 weeks after the initial recognition. It was held in the Pentagon, in the same building where Hal had been serving coffee just a month earlier. This time, however, he entered through the main entrance as an honored guest, rather than a service worker. The secretary, a career civilian with deep respect for military service, was direct in his approach. "Mr. Morrison, your story has been a wake-up call for all of us. We've been so focused on supporting younger veterans returning from recent conflicts that we've neglected some of the heroes from earlier generations. That's unacceptable, and we're going to do something about it." The meeting resulted in a commitment to review the cases of older veterans who might be struggling with inadequate support. A new initiative would be launched to identify and assist Medal of Honor recipients and other highly decorated veterans who were facing financial hardship. Hal's case would serve as a model for how the system should work, but perhaps the most meaningful change came from General Walker's ongoing advocacy. She had taken Hal's story to Congress, where it prompted hearings on veteran affairs and led to new legislation improving benefits for older veterans. The law that eventually passed was informally known as the Harold Morrison Act, though Hal insisted his name not be used in the official title. As months passed, Hal's life stabilized in ways he had not experienced since Sarah's death. The financial support from various sources allowed him to move into a comfortable apartment in a senior community that specialized in veteran housing. He no longer needed to work for basic survival, though he continued to volunteer with Margaret's catering company because he enjoyed the work and the sense of purpose it provided. More importantly, he had become an unofficial advocate for other veterans. General Walker had connected him with various organizations that needed someone who understood the challenges facing older veterans. His modest manner and authentic experience made him an effective spokesperson, even though public speaking was not something he had ever imagined himself doing. On the first anniversary of his recognition at the Pentagon, Hal was invited to speak at a veterans event. As he stood before an audience of several hundred people, veterans, military officers, government officials, and family members, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. "A year ago, I was serving coffee and trying to make ends meet," he began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I thought my service was in the past, that the medal I earned was just a reminder of something that happened long ago. But I've learned that service never really ends. It just takes different forms." He paused, looking out at the audience. "I see veterans in this room who are struggling, just like I was. I see young men and women who've returned from deployments and are trying to find their place in civilian life. I see families dealing with the aftermath of injuries, both visible and invisible. And I want you to know that you are not alone." The speech was not eloquent in the traditional sense, but it was authentic and powerful. When he finished, the standing ovation lasted for several minutes. Later, as people approached him with their own stories and struggles, Hal realized that General Walker had been right. Sometimes personal stories become bigger than ourselves, and we have a choice about how to use that platform. That evening, as he sat in his comfortable apartment looking at the framed photographs from his military service, Hal reflected on the unexpected turn his life had taken. He was no longer invisible, no longer struggling to pay rent or worrying about his next meal. But more than the material improvements, he had rediscovered a sense of purpose and community that had been missing since Sarah's death. The Medal of Honor still sat in its simple frame, but it no longer felt like a relic from the past. It had become a bridge, connecting his service as a young soldier to his current role as an advocate and mentor. The recognition he had received that day in Conference Room 3C had not just changed his circumstances. It had reminded him that his value as a person extended far beyond any job title or financial situation. As he prepared for bed, Hal thought about the speech he would give the following week to a group of young veterans. He would tell them what he had learned. That dignity comes from within. That service takes many forms. And that it is never too late to make a difference in the lives of others. Most importantly, he would remind them that they were part of a brotherhood that extended across generations, and that their struggles were shared and understood by those who had walked similar paths. The old veteran who had once served coffee in silence had found his voice, and in doing so, had helped countless others find theirs as well.